もう空手で一番大事なのはね、目だよ。試合の時にね、相手が怖いからって言って顔を伏したらね、殺されちゃうと。絶対相手の目を見て、相手の動きを見て、ね、自分も動く。相手は、自分が怖い時は相手も怖い。相手は神様じゃない。自分が怖いなと思ったら相手も怖いよ。だからね、目をそらすっていうことはもうすでに負けだから。だからね、蹴るところまっすぐ見るようにしてください。目を大きく開いて。
Mas Oyama. Born Choi Young-wei, 1923, in Zenra Hokudo, the former province of Chosen in South Korea, was the founder of Kyokushin Karate. Kyokushin is the origin of full-contact karate, and Oyama, often called its most influential figure. He would inspire a variety of media, some based on his own life, and his image, in turn, would ripple outwards to popular Japanese culture. Perhaps most well-known of the takes on Oyama is Capcom's Ryu, the broad-shouldered, minimalist martial artist. In artwork for the first two Street Fighter games, the stylization of this archetype is pretty clear. Ryu is grounded in reality, but there's still an exaggeration in his huge build. Only a few years later, in 1992, rival developer SNK would unveil Art of Fighting, with their own take on Oyama. Takuma Sakazaki, penned by Toshiaki Mori, aka Shinkiro. The first time you lay eyes on Shinkiro's artwork, there is something enrapturing about it. It feels real, but fantastical at the same time. There's an energy and liveliness to them, despite depicting a world that's recognizable. When it comes to music, don't Earth, Wind, and Fire and Boston make you feel the universe? Their effect is that fantasy becomes energy. Shinkiro always wanted to be an artist, but was truly inspired to be an illustrator by the works of Noriyoshi Orai and Frank Frazetta. After landing a job at SNK following a manga publication, he would work there for over a decade before their bankruptcy, jumping over to Capcom, where he still contributes art to this day. His early work includes several covers that show off a painterly style with lots of attention to fabric, lighting, and contrast between warm and cool colors. In many ways, it feels reminiscent of a general 80s anime and manga look. However, it wouldn't be long before he fell into a distinct art style that built on these foundations. When I look at Shinkiro's art, I am immediately drawn to his eyes. Often, he uses a character's gaze to not only grab the viewer, but tell the story of the image. For instance, this classic drawing of King of Fighters Leona and Hydern. Leona's vision is focused, piercing from the page. Meanwhile, what Hydern's eyes lack in intensity, they make up for in wisdom. They are slightly narrower, older, and one is missing entirely. From there, you might notice that he's clearly stooping down to get to her level, that his shoulders are much broader than hers, and that her vest is just a little too big for her frame. Without a single word spoken, without a solid background, without any context at all, you understand the relationship between these two. A much more direct example of the eyes is this image of Kyo facing off with Iori. In the middle are Nakoruru and Akari, with bigger, rounder eyes, two innocents caught up in the struggle. The illustration also shows off his unique approach to detailing, because Shinkiro often chooses to outline only the edge of a shape, Kyo and Iori's chins are drawn, but the inner details like jawline, the shape of their lips, the subtler musculature of their necks is expressed with shading and highlighting. If we take a look back at his inspirations, there's a clear through line, like Noriyoshi Orai's poster for The Empire Strikes Back. By expressing things like body shape and the folds of clothes through precise lighting, he's able to make each part of an abstract composition fit together. This is merely imagery from the film, not a scene, and so the scope and emotion are more important to convey. Things like a character's environment can be implied for the purpose of drawing the audience in. Take the most basic image, a close-up of a character facing straight ahead with no background. Shinkiro makes excellent use of contrast here, a blank white background broken by Kyo's dark hair and jacket, which themselves frame his light skin and headband. If you look even closer, the dark of his eyebrows and the mascara-like shadows under his eyes make their whites all the more attention-grabbing, and the dark irises pointed. There are at least 6 layers of black and white in this image, each of which draw you into the literal focal point of the piece, not to mention the fuzzy effect around Kyo, which gradually sharpens as you go inward, a testament to his ability to do so much with so little. This piece is very similar, but adds color. There's now contrast, not just within a single character, but between two. The sunset tones on Kyo's side, not to mention his warmer complexion and hair. Meanwhile, everything about Iori is cold, pale. One of his eyes is covered as if he's hiding something. I'm impressed by the way Shinkiro can express character in such minor ways, like this illustration of classic SNK villain Geese Howard, surrounded by 2 bodyguards and his right-hand man, Billy Kane. You immediately understand how important he is. He's lit brighter than anyone else in the scene, making his skin and hair color pop out. His chair is a red so vivid that it makes his suit look even darker. Meanwhile, Billy is dressed up, but still dons his trademark bandana and wields the Sansetsukon. It's just enough of a mismatch to make him stand out and imply the kind of setting that he inhabits. I've always felt like many of the SNK fighters took place in a kind of 70s or 80s urban martial arts movie, and this illustration looks like a poster straight out of one. I also like the way that he's standing, giving the side eye to the viewer. There's a kind of casual threat in the way that he holds himself that distinguishes him from Geese's gaze, a smug superiority. Everything that Shinkiro would do here is a precursor to this piece, the cover of King of Fighters 97. One of the things I find most impressive about Shinkiro is the way he can take exaggerated character designs and not only make them solid, but place them in equally solid locations. Every character in this scene tells a story, not only in their placement, but their body language, and their eyes. Iori faces away from everyone, not looking to the audience, but the ground, suggesting his single-minded focus on destroying Kyo alone. Kyo himself looks towards Iori, aware of the threat he poses, but he doesn't actually face him. There's no real hate for him. He's simply preparing for the fight. Shingo admires Kyo from out of his sight, a reference to his fanboy obsession with him. Billy relaxes against the dumpster. Much like Kyo, Billy is a delinquent with a heart of gold who cares for his friends and family, but his love of easy money and entanglement with the criminal world puts the two at ends with each other. They're close in nature, but facing opposite directions. Blue Mary stands out from the rest of the characters. She sees her entry in the tournament as just another job, and doesn't have any complicated feelings about any of it, so her stare follows off-screen to other things. Meanwhile, Chris stares off nonchalantly, a nod to the surprise twist that this innocent young boy becomes the host for the ultimate evil. 97 is considered by fans to be one of the darkest entries in the series, the culmination of the most ambitious storyline in fighting games at the time. This cover captures that tension. Chaos is just around the corner, like standing in a dingy back alley, listening to the trembling of engines on the street. Many of Shinkiro's most iconic works from the post-SNK era would be large ensemble pieces for Capcom that resemble his inspirations in Ourai and Frazetta, but I'm especially fond of his quieter scenes. Take this image. Iori, whom he usually depicts as stone-faced or wrathful, is framed differently. The time is unclear. It's either late night or early morning. That light could be a street lamp or the sun rising through the fog. It looks cold and bright. Even in the after hours, Iori is notably darker than everything else, not to mention his bright red hair separates him from the rest of the color palette. I like that the milk carton is also red to make the visual association between him and the act stronger. For once, we see the consequences of Iori's angry, loner nature. He's just that, alone. But there's a ray of kindness in him. This was a piece for Metal Slug 3, of the gang finding that a mouse has nested in some kind of artillery of theirs. Every character's expression tells you so much about them. Eri has a gentle surprise compared to Tarma's more comedic sunglass rays. Marco seems entertained, taking it in stride, while Fio can't even be bothered and is inspecting the inside. Metal Slug is known for non-stop action and huge explosions, so Shinkiro drew a scene that's just a slice of life. It's casual and sweet, kind of nostalgic, like a memory these characters would chuckle about years later. This cover for King of Fighters 98 amuses me a lot. 98 was a break from the storyline and just tried to stuff as many characters as possible into what they called a dream match to celebrate the conclusion of the Orochi saga, the first 4 games covered. Fittingly, all of the characters are seen relaxing in a backyard, poolside, dressed up and chatting. It's like they're actors at a rap party. There's a lot to learn from the period where his style was evolving. A common joke was that he suffered from same-face syndrome, or more specifically, that all his characters looked like George Clooney. Take this piece for KOF 96, for instance. Now, if you were to tell me that this was traced, I'd probably believe you. This image looks a little off, because all of the characters' faces are turned directly to the camera despite them being at different angles, and they're outlined almost as if he drew the bodies and heads separately. Certainly not his best work, but if you look closer, you can see the hallmarks of his art taking shape. Notice the difference in body between Mai and King, the former sporting a smoother figure, while the latter has a subtle tone to her. If we fast forward to KOF 98, he's gotten the hang of drawing unique faces, and is well on his way to mastering that attention to muscle and fat. Consider the difference between Blue Mary and Leona in KOF 99, or Takuma and Joe. That style would further blossom into his work for both SNK and Capcom, as well as his ability to tell stories. This artwork for Resident Evil 3 is especially powerful, not depicting any of the game's main characters, but the response of a normal, everyday person whose life was turned upside down. You can even make out where tears have left trails on her face, and the haunting resignation in her gaze. It's rare that a single artist becomes synonymous with an entire company, especially one who doesn't even take much of an interest in that company's product. By his own admission, Shinkiro doesn't care much for games, and yet he was able to become the face of SNK, or more accurately, draw its face. In an interview for the 10-year anniversary of King of Fighters, he expresses some surprise that it's lasted so long, and attributes its success to its visuals, as well as its fascinating characters. Shinkiro's pieces are more than the sum of their parts. They're fantasies, grounded in reality, made flesh and bone with careful strokes of pen and ink. The energy of those stories is spoken, as always, in the eyes.
Here comes the daredevil!